Hello.
Howdy.
John.
How's it going, Clint?
All right. Waiting here on when you guys are getting your money.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Chip, how's it going? Chip's out. Hey, Allison.
So,
Is there any way we can share those documents I sent you in like the chat or something?
yeah, I would say I'll wait for you to get started. Just because once you put something in there, people who previously were already here, or they don't have access to it, yada yada. So I'll do that
Yeah.
when you get started.
Sounds good. I'll reference it when I get started too.
Cool.
Allison, are you still gonna have Gano go at the end, or do you want to move him up?
It's up to you. I would say you can go first since that's the bulk of it, but it's up to you.
Okay. I just know if you wanted to wait around.
He didn't mention anything. So we can just proceed as we planned. All right.
Sounds good.
There's the three things, so the WMA brochure, the project list, and the campaign installed practices.
Correct.
I will get these ready.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, John.
About time for a haircut. Hide these grays.
You get with three little girls.
That's right. Little tricksters. Hey, Jack. It's been a while.
How we doing?
Hi,
Good.
Jack.
Hello.
Steve, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing good.
Recording in progress.
We're just to give it 2 more minutes to let people keep rolling in, then we'll start. If while you're here already, you want to throw your name and organization in the chat, that'd be helpful for the meeting records. Please and thank you. All right, we expected to have about 30 at least, and we're about 29 there. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Greater Des Moines Council of Watershed Management Authorities February 2022 meeting. As you all told, been invited, today we're going to be going over the annual review for each of the WMAs in the area. John Swanson will be leading a handful, and then we'll hear from the folks at North Raccoon as well. If you haven't already, please do put your name and organization in the chat. That'll help me later on. And then over the next couple of minutes while John gets started in his presentation, I'll also be uploading a handful of documents to the chat too that he'll reference as he moves through. So with that, John, you should have all the controls. Let me know if you need anything from my end.
Excellent. Thanks, Allison. And thanks everybody for joining today. As I share my screen. Can everybody see that? And do you all see my next slide, or do you see the single slide?
We see your slide deck.
How's that look?
No different.
Changed yet.
Yeah, still just a slide deck.
Good start. How about now?
Just swap your view and then you're good.
Man,
Perfect.
we're rolling now.
Yep, good to go.
All right, and here we go. So, as also mentioned, we are going to take this Council WMAs meeting and really give a thorough update of what we've been working on across the WMAs. Specifically, I'll be helping guide the conversation through both 4 Mile Creek, Walnut Creek, Mud Camp Spring, and eventually Beaver Creek. And we'll have some guest presenters from Jennifer Welch, Tanner Poles, and Laura James as we get going through. Just a quick presentation outline. It's important to note that our goal of this presentation is really to share accomplishments, projects, successes, and failures from across all of these watersheds. You'll find some of these projects, one or more of us coordinators were very involved in. Some of the other projects may be just sharing what local cities or jurisdictions have had completed in the watershed. And as Allison adds them into the chat bar, you'll find a couple different attachments. One of them being, as we go into our education outreach section, we're going to reference some of the rainscaping practices installed across the metro. You'll find a table showing the fiscal year installed practices over the last several years. You will also find a project master list that we've started culminating all of our watershed improvements onto a single Excel spreadsheet for tracking purposes. That kind of came out of the state, us asking how much state, federal, and local funding we've spent in the watershed. So that's a pretty good start at tallying all of our projects that we will go over as we get going. And then the final attachment is a PDF brochure that we'll cover at the very end regarding an effort to get some full-time funded coordinators from the state. So with that, you'll see we have quite an outline here today. We're going to try and, I know none of us wants a long, boring presentation. So we're going to try to keep things flowing nicely. We're going to jump between topics. We're going to keep it rolling. And we're going to try and keep all questions for the end as we roll through. And to kick things off, we're going to start with a little policy update, and I'll turn it over to Jennifer Welch.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, I'm going to take a minute and talk a little bit about stormwater policy and how it's related over the last several years. So you can probably switch to the next slide, John, if you want. So many of you know that we were all involved in the Capital Crossroads process, about a 2-year process that occurred in 2018 and 2019, which really looked at an education and informational gathering process with tours, where we went through a process with the jurisdictions to agree on a lot of key points for how we might want to move forward with stormwater in the metro. So we had gone through that process and came upon the adoption of the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual, the unified sizing criteria, and looking at release rates and modeling, as well as the applicability of where this would be instated. So since then, you can see from this particular map, this is the stormwater updates for Capital Crossroads, and Polk County and the other jurisdictions in green have passed the updated ordinance process. So they are now running with what was agreed upon by the entire group in that process that we went through. So that's been something that's been ongoing, where we've been working with the jurisdictions, and the jurisdictions have been working to add that back into how they're already managing stormwater in their communities. And the ones that you see shaded that aren't shaded green yet are in process of addressing and looking through to get those ordinances updated. Okay, next slide, John. We've also taken a deep dive into the stream buffer ordinance. Back in about 2018, the Mud Spring Camp and 4 Mile took a look into ordinances and were adopted within Polk County, and also the green shaded ones that you can see on your screen. So they have updated ordinances and policies dealing with stream buffers and what it means to work with the stream as it goes through the communities and into new development areas. Since then, also, the Western cities got together through the process in Walnut to look at an adoption process. So the cities, it was led by Doug Olendike and Clive, and we reviewed many options, completed a comprehensive framework, and outlined the best approach for the growing areas and developed zones. So that's an ongoing thing where we've been meeting throughout 2021 and are really on the cusp of really going forward and looking at it harder to get some of those approved for those areas. So we've had a lot of things happening with policy. I think you can do next slide, John. So moving forward, we're gonna, continue assisting with the adoption process. However, we can help and with whatever help any of them need, as well as, internally discussing. One of the other things that's really come up is there's some interest in creating a stormwater help group where we can get together to talk about some of the key things that might make it easier for adoption and implementation of the ordinance going forward. we're really, looking at what are the needs and what are the opportunities and how can we collaborate through the WMA to make it work better and facilitate a lot of additional training opportunities for, the design process, through ISWEP. Design training will be coming at the end of March, and then we've got plans to do some other training going forward too, to make sure everybody's up on the latest information.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen.
Sure.
Next, we're going to jump to stormwater education. The RAIN campaign, many of you are familiar with it. Those of you that aren't, it's been a multi-year DNR Section 319 funded educational campaign. Started off with some grant funding. We've been trying out over the past several years about every education or outreach tool you can imagine with varying degrees of success. But in preparation for this interview, one of the main measures of success from that grant was, could we develop educational tools that equated to homeowners taking action in the form of installing stormwater management practices in their yards? So I did take a deep dive. I reached out to many of the cities on this call and I asked, how many households have you done cost share programs with? And I threw those numbers up. One of the spreadsheets that I've been tossed in the chat is actually the detailed fiscal year practices per year, but we did throw it on this table. The RAIN campaign officially started in the middle of FY19. So you can see there across the metro in FY18, we had about 150 homeowner practices installed in the metro. FY19, about the same numbers, 164. Late in FY19 is when we really started launching some of those RAIN campaign tools and methods. And I was kind of excited to see this large uptick culminating into FY21, about 374 practices installed across the metro. And I would say, while I'm extremely pleased with these numbers, I would say this isn't all attributed to RAIN campaign, but I'd say it's just as correlated to cities putting in more conscious effort towards sharing their cost share programs and educational information, which at the end of the day is really what we're trying to achieve, is more people out hitting the ground, sharing information. Kind of the takeaway before the campaign started was just dedicating money is not enough to get homeowners to install practices and take action. And the one example I really want to highlight this was the city of Des Moines. So in many of our opinions, Des Moines really stepped up the last couple of years with their on the grounds kind of grassroots effort. Here is actually an educational resource that came directly out of the city as they've been trying to promote rain gardens. They've even went as far as city staff out doing community projects. Here's an example of actually a rain garden that was installed. And we've even teamed up on some things like this is a demonstration rain garden that they installed on their own park property, where once they installed it, they had some different groups out to share the information. At the end of the day, the city of Des Moines, real focus on sharing information has equated very clearly in their implementation numbers. And just again, a great example that we wanted to point out as really what the goal was for the RAIN campaign. Another model that some of you we've talked about is we were looking at these cost share programs. They're gaining popularity across the metro. All the way back when we were doing them on Easter Lake, it's kind of where it started. But since then, more and more communities are getting into it. But more and more, we've heard many of the same issues from homeowners, mainly being that there's some serious barriers if a homeowner wants to, say, install a soil quality restoration. One of them oftentimes is upfronting the entire cost of the project and waiting for that reimbursement. Many homeowners have trouble finding contractors, and overall, the submitting of plans, finding a contractor, getting estimates, submitting for reimbursement. What we found is some homeowners it gets to be too much of a hassle, and they don't make it to the end. And it's funny enough, as Tanner's going to talk about later, many of the same things we learned about with saturated buffers and bioreactors, we were hearing from our urban homeowners. So just outside of our watershed boundaries, but an opportunity came up where Polk City pursued a grant through the Water Quality Initiative Urban that many of us have all applied for. But they said, what if they pursued a grouping model where the city managed the funding, homeowners provided an upfront payment to the city. If they qualified for low to moderate income requirements, they actually could get the full cost covered. And then again, instead of waiting for homeowners to apply, actually doing some targeted outreach. And I would say that you can see in the top picture there, some of the worst soils I've ever seen throughout Polk City, just very, very poor soils that have been impacted by developments. And they were able to actually do this new model in just one season. So outreach happened in July. Applications came soon after in August, and the project was bid out to a single contractor. And that single contractor installed 62 soil quality restorations in the last fall of 2021. Some of the key lessons learned: very popular, a lot of very satisfied homeowners, very efficient for the contract. We actually had a local source of we actually stockpiled the compost in Polk City to save on driving time. But from a city side, there was significantly more planning and administrative duties for city staff. But overall, with soil quality restorations, it seemed to be a very good fit. And most recently, the city of Clive, Rachel Conrad has worked to submit a similar grant and a goal to top the 62 installed in Polk City with the similar grants to go after 100 SQRs in a targeted neighborhood approach in the city of Clive. So really excited about this model. It's something that myself, Jennifer Welch, could help really any community pursue if you have a targeted neighborhood that you really want to get some practices installed. Also, a side project that we just want to throw in there that came up in the city of Bondurant, that it's amazing when you send out all these educational things, folks are going to call you. So here we got contacted by the city Bondurant Soccer Club, who they were dealing with some issues with compaction, poor soil quality, and really a lot of irrigation needs that they were drawing water from Lake Patoka. So here we actually are pursuing some funding to do a 13-acre soil quality restoration in a single application that, if funded, we'll know in a couple weeks, we will move forward with this spring. And finally, we've spent a lot of time talking about homeowners, a lot of time directing educational tools to them. But we've also been outreached over the last several years by a lot of different commercials, properties, and businesses. So we actually have been formed a partnership with the Iowa Finance Authority, who just moved into a new building off of Bell Avenue in the city of Des Moines. And on that property, they have about every older scenario you run into, where parking lot's too big, there's a big dry basin, there's no good outdoor spaces for employees. And so we saw this as an opportunity to go through a planning process and really develop this into a educational kind of centerpiece. So coming this spring, we're going to have a series of educational tools that are going to be developed to target commercial properties and businesses. That's kind of a different angle to the RAIN campaign. And moving forward, I'll be the first one to tell you, the RAIN campaign's had kind of ebbs and flows of success. Some things that have been hugely popular and created social media buzz, to other things that have been a complete not success. And that's okay. That was really the point of it. But we were very excited, as we've talked to all of you about hiring a water resources outreach coordinator. The truth of it, over the last couple of years, Jennifer Welch, myself, Julie Perot, and Allison Van Pell and Pat Sauer, we all have teamed up to dedicate a small amount of our time to make these tools successful. We really think with this new outreach coordinator, things are going to really skyrocket and really take some of those business outreach tools, identify new opportunities for neighborhood installation projects, and fill up an event calendar. We still have that traveling artwork that's been incredibly popular when it gets out in this COVID world, and that calendar is already filling up for 22. So again, if you are interested in those sculptures, feel free to give me a holler, and myself and our new outreach coordinator will be happy to make appearances at your public events. Real quick, jump into water monitoring. Just a quick update on this, because we're going to see some more formal presentations and information coming out later this summer. But 2022 is a big year. We've been working with Drake University in 4 Mile and Walnut Creek for going on 3 years now. Their study that is 6 real-time monitoring stations in 4 Mile and Walnut Creek is coming to an end in summer of 2022. And really the big goal of that study was to make a series of recommendations back to the WMA for practices or management options. So as we're coming into summer of 2022, we're going to be looking forward to that very in-depth final report and a set of recommendations that we can all consider into our daily work and how we move forward with our plan implementation. Now, our Aquabot study that we've talked to some of you all about that we're doing in Upper 4 Mile, that's seeking to quantify some of the benefits of all the tiles that we're treating and the trails and mitigation bank. That's aquatic drone that you can see driving in the stream there. It's going to keep operating until the end of 2022. But very important, as these studies come to an end and we get this information, we've already started talking to some folks on input on what's the best, how should we move forward? Do we just want these studies to end, or is there some level that they should continue? And as we all know, Polk County is very unique in that our conservation department has a very in-depth biweekly monitoring. That monitoring has continued and will continue on into the future. And boom, we're into implementation already. We broke this down into several key practices that are really going well in the metro. The first one being stormwater wetlands. This practice that just a few years ago, really there were none on the landscape, have really been popping up across the metro. We've seen installations now, several in Des Moines, Polk County, Ankeny, Clive, and then even further up into the Beaver Creek watershed, where Jennifer Welch has been working with several communities, Granger, Ogden, and Perry, looking at some new sites. So here you can see all the red sites are stormwater wetlands. The yellows, the reds have been installed. The yellows are in some type of planning phase. Now it's important to note with these ones, while the RAIN campaigns focus on creating education and awareness around homeowners, getting homeowners to take action, that's really not the only tool to manage our stormwater. These ones are usually a place where we can intercept either a drainage way or a sewer system and treat that water before getting into, say, 4 Mile Creek. And just to highlight a couple of my favorite projects, one that Amanda Brown's leading with conservation in the city of Des Moines in the Lower Greenway is what we call the 35th Street Stormwater Wetland. Unique partnership here in that, as you're going to see in a little bit, roads are about to be removed out of the Greenway. And this wetland is going to be excavated, and usually one of our larger costs is what do we do with the spoils? In this case, they're actually going to be using those spoils to backfill those roads, and again, create a very cost-effective way to install a stormwater wetland. And props to Amanda. Bids came in higher than expected. Had to look at some funding strategies. We're able to bring in funding from IDOLS, Polk County Conservation, City of Des Moines kicking in funding, and Iowa Finance Authority bringing that final piece together, being, I believe, their first awarded practice out of their watershed ARPA funds earlier this year. Another wetland coming in, very excited about, unique, and that has a very large drainage area. This conversation was actually started by the developer who saw parts of his property really not valuable to him, but he was well versed in watersheds, had an interest in making a land donation. The county moved forward with doing some feasibility, found that around 400 acres actually drained into this area. Through some creative engineering, we're looking at doing a diversion structure to kick water out of that tributary channel on the bottom left of that map there and into the stormwater wetland before getting into 4 Mile Creek. Again, one of the biggest costs for this one was spoils. And as we work with that developer, we have some adjacent development properties where that spoil is going to be deposited. And we did do some extra, we've completed a little bit of some feasibility and soils investigations to make sure that this soil is suitable for those development needs. And as of this morning, was just awarded $500,000 from the Iowa Finance Authority. So some great moving parts on this one. In the city of Ankeny, with looking at the conversation we oftentimes go through, land donation sounds great, but doesn't make sense for the county. Didn't necessarily make sense because of lack of connectivity to other county properties. However, this one does have connectivity through their Heritage Park to the north and some other natural resources areas to the east. So we've been in conversation with Ankeny, Polk County, and the developer about the best ways to move forward. And if everything goes as planned, will be a future Ankeny property. Another one, the last one I'll toss out to everyone that I haven't been greatly involved with, but working with Rachel Conrad with several different grant applications. Here we have the city of Clive, right next to the aquatic center where many of us have met. This will be a beautiful centerpiece project for that area, incorporating different types of not only water quality benefits, but community benefits, recreation, and really just want to share this rendering as a great, truly centerpiece project that utilizes a stormwater wetland into the design. Now, a lot of people ask, like, where have we found funding for stormwater wetlands? To me, if you have a good site that is feasible, it is one of about every funding source wants to do wetlands. So here is kind of a comprehensive list of when I looked at where we funded projects. WQI urban is going to be that 50%. If you have agricultural drainage coming to a potential stormwater wetland, traditional WQI water quality initiative funding is an option. SRF sponsored projects is very common. Clive has taken a unique approach where they've actually done some of the construction with their own staff. And then even getting creative with funding, we also received a Prairie Meadow Legacy grant for one of our wetlands in Polk County. So again, as always, if you have sites that you're interested in discussing, we'd love to chat. On the left there, I tossed in one that was done through that was brought up through the City of Bondurant Stormwater Master Planning process, and is currently on our list for some federal funding that we're going after through the long acronyms at the bottom there, NRCS, actually WFPO, it's not even on there, another acronym. So again, stormwater wetlands have proven to be a valuable tool for doing end of pipe treatments. Average drainage area has generally been in the 25 to 75 acres. On the upper end, near 400 acres for the Ankeny one, and there's also some other ones in Grimes that are getting looked at currently with much larger drainage areas. Jumping to our streams, as we roll through implementation that's happening, stream restoration is referenced in all of our plans. Projects like this one that was done through SRF sponsored projects. This is the second of 3 phases as part of a WRA sponsored project in 4 Mile Creek. City of Bondurant has really been stepping up as they've had some localized flooding. They've treated not only stream restorations as a way to stabilize the creek, but also to gain capacity in the stream channel by grading some floodplain benches. This stretch that's on this rendering is sets John Horton's been working on for installation this year, where they're also including 3 different water access points for people using adjacent trail systems to access the stream and enjoy it. Even beautiful Mud Creek, which may or may not look like a drainage ditch in some places, but could be a great resource. Just tossing in a couple other projects that were accomplished in the last year. This is a picture that was taken a few years ago from the city of West Des Moines. I actually worked with 3 different homeowners on this erosion issue. We actually had a head cut moving at about between 5 and 10 feet a year up towards the house in 2 different areas, and then a stream bank. We're able to get enrolled in the NRCS Emergency Watershed Protection Fund to split the cost 75% from the feds because the property was in imminent danger, and the homeowners provided the additional 25%. The county operated as the fiscal agent to complete the project, and here it sits right after construction, and you can see the real magnitude of that project. Continues rolling through some other stream projects. Here's one that was, again, a great example of partnership. We had the Gay Lee Wilson Trail running through the picture there. And we had a section that was identified as pretty much imminent danger for the trail. At its nearest, right before construction, it was 6 feet from the trail. And through a partnership, we were able to get enrolled in that Emergency Watershed Protection Fund that covered all the material costs, and City of Des Moines staff actually completed construction, and county conservation, because it's in their green belt, funded the design. So a true 3-way partnership to get this one on the ground. And the last one I'll toss in there, and before I move on from streams, is we did have a project we completed in Pleasant Hill, where the city had been battling how to handle this project because it was on private property. Picture doesn't really do it justice, but in that thicket on the picture on the left was about a 15-foot drop, right just a few feet from the foundation of this home. We're able to, again, when this emergency watershed protection came open, we're able to get this one into the program. So again, those of you that we worked with, emergency watershed protection opens up after a disaster declaration for, say, Polk County. And we try to always have kind of a running list of potential imminent danger properties. And if it was worsened or caused by that event, it gives you that opportunity. Now, again, I would say funding for stream stabilization, a lot more restrictive for many of our programs. The most commonly used one has been SRF sponsored projects. The emergency watershed protection was a very good fit. I think across the metro, we had projects in Pleasant Hill, the county, Windsor Heights, Altoona, Pleasant Hill. So it was a great opportunity. But we also have some funding for homeowners available that we've worked with through Polk SWCD and the REAP funding, NRCS and EQIP. And kind of exciting that several communities have taken a DIY approach because stream save is so expensive. Both Clive and Des Moines have operated and completed very good looking projects that needed to be stabilized. Now, this one specifically, we have some almost astronomical goals in our watershed plans for 4 Mile and Mud Camp Spring. For each of those watersheds, our 20-year goal is to stabilize 10 linear miles of streams. Now, what's amazing is, and if you look at our master project spreadsheet, you can actually click through the tabs on the bottom and you'll find stream stabilization. To date, we're getting close to 30% of that 20-year goal. And in red there is our planned projects. There's a long list of projects in the next few years that we have different levels of planning happening in 4 Mile Creek. That's ideally in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll be over 80% towards that's 100,000, 105,000 linear foot goal. Mud Camp Spring, a lot less projects have been happening, several in the last few years in Bondurant and Altoona, and several private farmers we've worked with, but a lot more stream save to achieve our Mud Camp Spring goal. Moving on, implementation. Many of you, we've talked about the Watershed Flood Prevention Operations Program. We're not going to get into much detail, but did want to share our work with FIRA for this federal funding with the longest name ever, WFPO. We've looked at many different variations of projects, started with flood control, now looking at watershed protection, and we've submitted our first projects for review from NRCS for direction on to move forward. Our main priorities are stream stabilization. Here's an example, one of those first submitted projects through what will soon be the mountain bike park next to Copper Creek Lake in Des Moines and Pleasant Hill. This is a stream stabilization and grade control project. Similarly, the second project on the main branch of 4 Mile Creek is a stream stabilization on the Sleepy Hollow property. And finally, another stormwater wetland that drains about 250 acres in the Norwoodville area that's on county property. So the two main practices we think we're planning on moving forward with that we believe will get the most funding is wetlands and stream restoration. So again, we're working in Mud Camp Spring and 4 Mile for those two practices. Flipping the script for one that we haven't talked about too much, but is a great project in and of itself, being led by Polk County. In 2018, in the area of Norwoodville, which sits right in the middle of the watershed between Ankeny and Des Moines, we have a community that all the parcels sit on septic systems. And in 2018, a 1 million square foot warehouse, some warehouses were built in the area, and a tax increments district was put together. And this tax increase was decided to be used to dedicate towards installing some sanitary sewer, which does reference several of our specific 4 Mile goals, where septics were identified as a bacteria pollutant source in the watershed. And through this one project in 2020, 47 homes were removed from old septic systems and put onto sanitary at no cost to themselves. They were able to put in the sewer and then get homeowners hooked up. Many of them in this area are low to moderate income, and waiving those connection fees was a goal of the county. 46 systems removed in 2021, and a lofty goal, but it sounds like, again, not really my world, but they have a plan to try and complete 800 septic system removals in the next 20 years. Continuing with implementation, a couple examples across the metro on greenways. So many of us are involved in different ways in greenways. It's referenced in many of our watershed plans. 4 Mile Creek Greenway, a lot of the acquisition is now complete. There's just a few holdover properties in the lower greenway, and it has been turned over from the city to the county. And the long-term goal, there's some beautiful maps like this one, beautiful for me, looking at restoration plans, around 200 acres of woodland restorations planned, 170 acres of prairie planting, and 9 oxbow restorations. Again, Amanda and Cassie and Doug over at the County Conservation Department have been doing a great job communicating with homeowners, because this is a great example. Everyone imagines these beautiful prairies and beautiful oak savannas. But if you drive down there right now, you will see things like this, where if you lived in that house, this could feel overwhelming. But they've gone through some interesting processes to identify trees worth keeping that fit the natural floodplain and those that are not. So this picture is an example of an area that used to be a residential neighborhood, and all those homes have been removed due to flood damage. So you can imagine here the importance of communication with the homeowners in the neighboring areas, as well as prairie. Really sharing that prairie doesn't just get established in 1 year. It's been interesting. I visit this area often as I'm a East Sider, as many of you know, and as I drive through, it's really important as they try to kill that leftover vegetation from people's yards. Sometimes it's quite difficult to kill, take several rounds of tillage and bed prep and herbicide application, but it's not a 1 year process. It's a longer process. And the county has just started their first 20 acres of restoration and seeding this last year. And really exciting, the big momentum piece for this year is the moving forward with road removals. This is where our conservation and city of Des Moines, they've planned it into 3 phases. Most of these roads don't have any houses on them anymore. So the plan is somehow some roads are going to be completely removed. Others will actually be narrowed to a bike trail path or walking trail path. And some others will be left with cul-de-sacs, and really a comprehensive plan there put together between the city and the county. And again, I just want to reference this project again of what I feel is missing from the 4 Mile Creek watershed, that this will provide for the Walnut Creek Greenway is a true centerpiece project to draw people in. I think when it's installed, is going to be a great example. Something we've talked about in 4 Mile, but have yet to really find what is that layout and location of a centerpiece project that brings together water quality, restoration, and community benefits. And so moving forward with greenways, a couple of the goals that I'd like to see, I think myself, I need to do a better job of finding ways to incorporate REAP funding more effectively. It's something that some cities have locally done very effective, but it's a great tool for land acquisition. I want to find ways to really get it on the calendar to target REAP funding with our greenways, developing a centerpiece project for lower 4 Mile, better understanding the stream stabilization needs along Walnut Creek. I know Clive's done a lot of great work, and other communities have referenced goals of doing more stream stabilization. But I think to connect funding like we have in 4 Mile, we need to get a better understanding of those needs and exact locations. Rolling forward into one of our last implementation categories is regional detention. Many of you know we've been working on this, what we call the Finley Basin. One of 4 sites that have been identified through several studies along Alice's Road in Walnut Creek. I would say what we've learned in 4 Mile continues to this day in Walnuts, and that these projects are very expensive and very complex. But what's been good about the Finley Basin so far, it has given us a reason to go out and meet with Dallas County, their staff and supervisors who are not members of Beaver or Walnut Creek WMA. But Jennifer and I had a good, we were asked to come present to their board last week, their board of supervisors, and have now had several meetings with county staff. So they have been interested in that and seem to have an increasing interest in how they could partner in the Walnut Creek watershed. Jumping over to Mud Camp Spring in Altoona, again, a great example of being creative. The city of Altoona purchased a future park property that's called the Townsend Pond. Again, if you imagine a very stereotypical old farm pond that's been filled in, this pond is now is getting designed and plans put together for how do you retrofit this into a true stormwater structure that can also provide park benefits. And correction, it's actually in the Little 4 Mile Creek watershed. So this will also help go towards our regional detention goal for 4 Mile Creek. And as again, many of you have known, we did cite 3 large basins through the WFPO process with FIRA. Very interesting that they fell almost exactly where the watershed management plan pointed them out. But for that project, due to development pressures and land values, we could not meet the cost benefit requirements of the flood control through WFPO. So we did move to stream stabilization and wetlands. But it was a very good exercise, and that one I think we can learn a lot from. Regional detention moving forward, I think we're really back to square one in 4 Mile Creek. We're hoping we had our slam dunk project with 100% funding from the feds, but with not being able to meet their cost benefit requirements, I think we're back to the reality is we're not going to fix flooding in 4 Mile Creek, but detention could be used to ensure it does not get worse. There's also some information I just saw recently from Ankeny Parks Department about planning for future parks. And they outlined a lot of similar goals as the 4 Mile Creek regional detention goals. So I think that is a great opportunity that we can pursue in 2022. Again, Alsa's Road, 4 structures. How can we put together a funding package that makes sense? We do have at least one extremely interested landowner. And in Mudcamp Spring, Bondurant currently working on some plans for a large regional park. Would be a great step towards some of the regional detention goals there. And we did develop through some of our outreach for the federal funding. We do have about half a dozen very interested landowners that want to do some different projects, such as large farm ponds. So we're going to have to develop a new strategy because that didn't fit too well in the WFPO. And before I turn it over to our next speaker, touch real quick on future projects that are happening or that are in some level of planning that were exciting enough to make it into the presentation. One in Walnut Creek, things just getting kicked off. Waukee, through some work where they want to extend some sanitary sewer, going to be eligible for some significant sponsored project dollars, and looking at not only how can they stabilize Walnut Creek running through their city boundaries, but also partnering with some of their neighboring cities. Could potentially be a very large stabilization similar to those done by WRA in 4 Mile Creek. City of Grimes is again getting some more sponsored project dollars to the tune of around $2 million. They've outlined a variety of projects in both Walnut and Beaver, ranging from the Finley Basin to some large regional wetlands to stabilizations. Regardless, all of these projects will offer significant watershed benefits as they have some time to hone in what exactly they're going to do. And shout out to conservation again for an exciting project that we've mentioned before. They keep telling me in the next couple of weeks it's going to get approved. But regardless, the mitigation bank at Trails End offering wetlands, streams, and forested wetland credits. It's going to be, I'm told, the largest mitigation bank in the states. Literally checks off one of our boxes in the 4 Mile plan of create a mitigation bank. And 4 Mile and again in 4 Mile Creek, Polk County, we're taking our first venture into bioretention cells in the public works departments through a build grant for Broadway Avenue reconstruction, looking at around 20 bioretention cells and several stormwater basins to treat water on about 16,000 linear feet of roadway, which will go a long ways, almost doubling our 20-year goal for Green Street retrofits in the 4 Mile Creek watershed. And lastly, again, one that excites me but may not excite everybody, but I've been driving by these giant basins in 4 Mile Creek since I was for years now. Two of them, Des Moines is investigating, could these basins be retrofitted to provide additional water quality benefits and not just flood control in the Four Mile Creek watershed off Easton Avenue and Hole Avenue. Huge areas, a lot of water gets pumped or pushed into those. It could be a really impactful, beneficial project for the watershed. And with that, and 15 minutes to spare in the present, I'm going to turn over to Tanner Poles, who's going to give us a real quick highlight of the Blitz project and how it impacts both the watershed and from a statewide perspective. Tanner, you ready?
Yep. Yeah, thanks, John. So like John said, I'm going to do my best to keep this brief, as I'm sure a lot of you are tired of hearing me talk about this for the past couple of years. But basically, this all kind of started back in 2019 with a conversation between John Norwood, Amanda Brown, and Charlie Schaefer. As far as these edge of field practices were fairly new at the time, and we knew they were a good thing, but they weren't getting installed at the rate that we kind of wanted them to, even though we had 100% cost share available and monitoring funds available. Like as you can see there, between 2015 and 2019, only 6 practices were installed in Polk County. So the conversation was kind of had, how do we increase adoption of these practices? We know they're a good thing. They're listed in our watershed management plans as a goal. So basically we spent about a year developing a new targeted outreach method and fiscal agent funding model, where instead of kind of these landowners coming in one by one and us pitching these ideas to them, we were really targeted in finding the best sites, reaching out to them directly, making things as simple as possible from a money standpoint. Traditionally with these practices, there were a lot of tax implications and dollars changing hands back and forth, landowners having to hire contractors. And we wanted to basically just make that process as simple as possible to make it as little of a hassle for these landowners and give them as little reason as possible to say no to installing these practices. As well as by kind of grouping these projects together, we could get a lot of efficiencies in survey, design, and construction, as well as just making it more appealing for contractors to bid on. A lot of contractors didn't really want to bid on a single saturated buffer, for example, a few $1,000 project. But if we have a big group of them, it's a lot more appealing. And after about a year of all that kind of new funding and new structure there, in 2021, we installed 40 saturated buffers in the watersheds and 11 bioreactors. To date, John and I have surveyed a little over 300 outlets, so we're getting pretty good at that process. And we've got quite a few installations slated for 2022. So next slide there. So this is just kind of a little map showing kind of the areas where a lot of these practices got installed last year. So you can see we kind of had the biggest success in that upper 4 mile grouping. We had about 40 sites up in there. A lot of landowners that kind of knew each other. We made some really good connections up there. We also had a grouping in middle 4 mile, a grouping down in Mud Camp Spring, and a grouping in Walnut. Worth noting that in the kind of first round of this in Mud Camp Spring, we ignored a lot of what we now know are good sites based on our ACPF tool that we use to identify saturated buffer sites. So moving forward into round 2, we've got a lot more good looking sites in Mud Camp Spring than we did round 1. And actually, yeah, so this is a good show here. This is kind of treated tile outlets in those 3 watersheds. So you can see in 4 mile, we're getting up there pretty close. And in fact, in upper 4 mile after round 2, we'll be pushing close to most of the outlets in that watershed being treated, which is exciting. And then Mud Camp Spring, you can see there, we didn't do a whole lot last year, but we got a good chunk planned for next year. And Walnut Creek continues to kind of be a point of contention between us and the land. You can see there that the 27 is notable and that a large chunk of the watershed is already being treated by a few large crepe wetlands. So it does kind of knock off a lot of sites that we're not going to pursue for saturated buffers because that water is already being treated by a wetland. But obviously we'll continue to push and try and get some sites installed there in the future. And then this is just kind of an interesting little pie chart here showing some installation numbers comparing us and the rest of the state. So you can see that statewide from 2010 to 2021, not including the practices we installed with the Blitz last year, there are 147 practices. That does include the 6 that were previous in Polk County. And then we installed 51 with the Blitz last year, and currently have about 85 slated for installation in 2022. So with that kind of second round, we're really pushing towards having close to half of all edge of field practices in Iowa in our watersheds. So that's exciting to see that we're kind of outpacing the rest of the state there. Hopefully we can kind of take the model we've created and give it to other counties so the rest of the state can kind of do similar projects and we can get those numbers up statewide. So, and then finally, just a thank you to all our partners. It's not just John and I on this. We want to thank the Polk Water Conservation District, their commissioners, obviously Polk County, acting as the fiscal agent there, the NRCS for all their help, obviously IDOLS, ADMC, Keegan doing a lot of work with us, really helping out, City of Des Moines, Heartland, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and the Farm Service Agency.
Excellent. Thanks, Tanner. And props to the City of Des Moines. We had in our round 1, we were planning on getting some significant funding from the Federal Farm Service Agency for sites on CRP. After about 6 months of conversations with positive feedback, they changed their interpretation of their rules and took away some of that funding. So we were left about 2/3 of the way through the project, and City of Des Moines was willing to partner with us on sites upstream of the city that provided water quality benefits coming down to Des Moines to help fill some of that funding need, as did the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and some others. And Heartland Co-op was our new partner for round 2, where they were, I'd say, extremely effective at reaching out to their customers on our behalf. So it wasn't just Tanner and I or Keegan saying, hey, we're the government and we're here to help you with a new program, but actually a trusted voice. And with that, we're going to turn over to Laura James, who's the new Beaver Creek coordinator, who many of you have maybe not met before. So maybe, Laura, give yourself a little introduction and walk us through what's going on in Beaver Creek.
Hi, I'm Laura, and as John said, I'm the new Beaver Creek Watershed Coordinator. I started in October, and before that, I was the Polk Soil and Water Conservation District intern, and before that, I was in college. So I'm new to this project. It's an exciting one to be a part of. Within the last few years, the WMA finished up their watershed plan and got an EPA Farmer to Farmer grant. Under that grant, we have 3 main priorities. The first one is soil health, and our approach to this will be to develop a program that involves soil health practices like no-till and cover crops. But our goal is mainly to improve the long-term adoption of these practices by incorporating peer-to-peer learning and mentorship. So we have the money to provide cost share for these practices, and also to hire some kind of advisor to advise participants and help them through kind of the difficulties of transitioning. And then our second main priority will be edge of field practices. And I won't talk on this a ton because Tanner kind of just did. But so we will be partnering with leaders in Polk County to kind of replicate their Blitz project and hopefully have a lot of success in Boone County. And our final priority under the grant is floodplain restoration. So our immediate approach to this will be to provide kind of a sign-up incentive for CRP to encourage landowners to take flood-prone farmland out of production and put it under native vegetation instead. And another part of these goals is oxbow restorations, and we already have oxbows mapped and prioritized throughout the watershed. So it will provide us a good tool when we're doing targeted outreach. And then kind of a more long-term part of our floodplain goals is to think ahead with a greenway approach, especially in the southern parts of the watershed where development pressure is a lot higher. So I will let Jennifer Welch talk about that.
Thanks. Yeah, we are really happy to have Laura on board and to have a coordinator for the Beaver Creek watershed. It's been really great for John and I to be working with Laura and getting her going with all these goals. So I've been working in the Beaver. You saw some of the stormwater wetlands and things that we're working on, but this greenway and as Beaver comes down, as you can see, along Saylorville Lake and down into Johnston and into Des Moines, it's really, I think, important to take a look at that greenway because it's really worth protecting. It really has the ability to be that true green infrastructure within the landscape that we're talking about. And you're probably familiar with some of the 4 Mile Greenway, what we're working with there and getting the homes out of the floodplain. And we're looking at how can we make sure that doesn't happen in this, and how can we manage rainfall and provide water quality and quantity mitigation and provide those recreational opportunities in the corridors for the people and the wildlife to move through there. And there's also some really neat resources in there, some blue heron rookeries and some really great species that we really want to protect. So there's some good partnerships forming, and we're really developing that approach to say, how can we work within this and how can we make sure that we stay ahead of that development that's really occurring quickly. And with that, we've had the opportunity of some different funding with some of the infrastructure funding that's going on, and a $3.5 million request has been placed to do restoration and acquisition within the greenway to really begin to kind of put these pieces together. So we're hopeful that we'll have the opportunity to be able to gather that funding and these partners and really make something of it. But I think, the time has probably come to look at formalizing a greenway plan a little more specifically, like we've done in the 4 Mile and like others have even looked at in the Walnut. So I think that's some of the upcoming goals are here, and you'll see more about this, and we'll be working hard at this as we move forward this year and next.
Thanks, Jen and Laura. And John is back to close us out. I'm going to talk real quick about, you may have seen in the paper or on the news last week, but a group of partners, including Polk County, Des Moines Waterworks, and IDALS, Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, we are purchasing one of these cover crop seeders. And again, that might sound a little crazy. It may have sounded crazy to me at first. But if you look at cover crops, which basically every watershed plan in the state is going to reference cover crops, how we need to get farmers to do more cover crops, how they provide water and nutrient benefits. But sometimes we don't talk nearly as much about the challenges surrounding cover crop adoption. So those of you that don't know, cover crops are something that are seeded. So once the corn or soybean, your crop is harvested, there's something else growing to cover the ground, to hold in that soil, to hold nutrients until the following growing, until something's planted the next spring. But to get, and also infiltration. So City of Des Moines recently did a study a couple years ago with the Iowa Flood Center, where they looked at in the Des Moines River watershed, what's the best way to reduce flooding? And very interesting, one of the recommendations was that improving soil health is a very important and could be a very successful tool to get the ground to do its job for us and hold water back, versus building lots of very expensive dams, which from my experience are incredibly hard to get, and where you have to actually take land out of production. This could be a mutual win-win. But some of the challenges are surrounded that to get the benefits, a farmer would have to do cover crops oftentimes 3 to 5 years before they start seeing some of the benefits. How do we provide some consultation to make sure that they're getting doing the steps successfully? That's where some of the Beaver Creek grants comes into play, about mentorship, connecting somebody with the cover crop experts. But also in Iowa, we've learned that a lot of our cover crops are flown on aerially with an airplane. And while that can be effective sometimes, other times you're not getting great seed to soil contact, or the wind is impacting and you're getting not an even spread of seed, or many things can happen. Another option would be drilling seed after harvest. But in Iowa, oftentimes that's too short of a growing window after harvest, and you're not getting enough growth to see those benefits. And that's why never ashamed to steal a good idea from someone else. In Kansas, what the state actually did is they actually purchased 9 of these cover crop seeders. They positioned them strategically around the state because the cover crop seeders can actually drive through the standing crops in August and drop that seed directly onto the soil and get it growing. So once your corn, for example, gets picked, like in this picture, you already have cover crops growing. This idea really came to culmination from a field day where the folks from Kansas came up to the 4 Mile Creek watershed, and Tanner and the Polkstone Water helped put together a field day. And many of the folks that were out there seeing this machine operates were like, wow, this is awesome. They're like, everyone there was really excited. And Heartland Co-op, who was one of the local cooperatives, was at that field day, and they learned about this Kansas model. And as they brought the idea to Polk County and Des Moines and Des Moines Waterworks, was this that if the equipment was purchased, it could be leased to them, and they are the agricultural experts who know how to drive this machinery. They are used to working with farmers. Again, a real win would be, how do you create a true business around selling conservation? And to us, that was kind of one of the big potential wins, was if you have a business that's not just selling corn seed or selling fertilizer, but they're actually selling conservation and they have a business model around it, that could be a win for everyone. So we actually finalized the fiscal agreements. We were able to get one of the first demo rigs off the line from John Deere early last fall, where in just 10 days we were able to seed over 2,000 acres of cover crops, and we provided some recommendations back to John Deere about how the machine could be better, and they are finalizing some of those tweaks. They actually made some of those improvements. So we're going to be working with Heartland Co-op, who's going to be responsible for some of the business plan around it, and how it's going to be driven and maintaining the equipments. And we have, over the next 4 years, a staggered acre goal of from 7 to eventually getting up to 12,000 acres seeded annually from this machine. While it is targeted for the Beaver Creek and the North Raccoon, we understand that especially the first couple of years, there likely will be some interest in other watersheds. So we hope to see this thing not just in Beaver, but in Walnut, but also in the North Raccoon, in 4 Mile Creek, and hopefully gaining a lot of interest. And at the end of the day, giving farmers a good experience with cover crops. Because again, I like to imagine if I was a farmer and I tried cover crops for a year and they didn't grow very good, maybe I tried it for 1 more year, maybe they grew okay. You'd be a real question about the validity of the practice. So anything we can do to help increase like the mentorship opportunities and give them alternate options for something that may get them a better growth so they can actually see the benefits is going to be a big win for everybody. So props to Patrick Bean and the Des Moines folks, and Jennifer Terry and the Idols folks, and John Norris and Bob here at Polk County. They helped us. We all put together a simple request to Idols, who ended up coming together with up to a $350,000 reimbursement if we reach our 40,000 acre goal. So, and as we rounded things out, we thought it'd be fun to just toss in a couple cool things that are happening in the watershed. For example, we have some award winners. One of our favorite farming families, the Lehman family up in Upper 4 Mile, they actually received from Governor Kim Reynolds and the Secretary of Ag Northey, Environmental Leader Award at the Iowa State Fair last year. Our own Windsor Heights in the Walnut Creek watershed got Best Development Award from Thousand Friends of Iowa for their reconstruction of University Avenue, which did incorporate some improved stormwater management. And retaining that, they actually retained that award from the Walnut Creek watershed from the city of Clive, who received a development award in 2020 for their work to basically turn an old non-functioning detention basin into a stormwater wetland. And then tossing in a couple others with some cute pictures of my kids in the background to make everyone feel happy at the end of this presentation. We did get a 2020 Circle of Excellence Watershed Award, and from the Soil and Water Conservation Society we helped them lead a tour for their international conference through our watersheds, and they gave us a little plaque and award for that assistance. And our last 2 slides, one, there's a state funding proposal coming from a group of different coordinators and staff across the state, where they're proposing to the state to provide at least 1 full-time coordinator through state funding permanent for each HUC 8 in the state. And they asked us how much funding had been utilized by the WMA since each of their creations. So again, If you haven't, take a look at the spreadsheet that we put together. Come to find out that since each of our, this is for 4 Mile, Walnut, Mudcamp Spring, and Beaver. Since each of their beginnings, we've done a total of 37 million in implementation and planning dollars. You can see the breakdown there, just around 11 million from the state, 6 million from the feds, 19 million in local dollars, a couple really big local projects, and you can actually peruse through each individual project and see the funding breakdowns. With the one caveat that I haven't had a chance to totally go through all the landowner contributions yet, so it's sitting around 400,000. And those of you from 4 Mile and Mudcamp Spring, you'll also see at the bottom different sheets for different watershed goals. While they're not all on there yet, many of them are, and you can actually see how we are doing in relation to each of our 20-year goals. And then by the practices, I couldn't get this information per watershed, but it was exciting, kind of cool that 931 residential stormwater practices have been installed since FY18, 57 saturated buffers and bioreactors. Within our watersheds, we've done 21 wetland restorations, 10 constructed wetlands, over 150 acres of native plantings, and over 7 miles of stream stabilization and restoration. And to close things out, a few final thoughts. I've spent a lot of time working with everybody to pull this information together over the last couple of weeks. I really feel like the rain campaign is really set to take off to another level. It's amazing how much success has been happening locally within each city with relatively little time commitment from myself and others. It's going to be interesting to see what can be achieved with a full-time person. Beaver Creek, really going off to a great start. Some really good meetings coming from Beaver Creek, some great committees forming. I think we have this big question looming across the metro as more and more of these stormwater ordinances are getting adopted, is how can we work together to make sure we all have a good experience? Because there's going to be a lot of difficult new designs, new regulations we're working with. I think we need to continue to ask, how can the WMA assist with these questions? We're all likely dealing with many of the same questions. Again, as I've spent a lot of time working through and putting these spreadsheets together, it does really set that although some of the goals for Mudcamp Spring and 4 Mile may have been somewhat pulled out of thin air, it does give you some really good concrete numbers, say, how are we progressing with different practices? And I would love, this was actually brought up the January Walnut meeting, is setting some project goals for the watershed, but potentially taking a step further and setting some long-term goals that we can work towards. And while I think some of the upstream basins of Walnut are some huge price tags, it's been, so far, it's a really good opportunity for us to work together as a WMA and bring in potentially some new partners. And finally, applying the Blitz success. So Blitz is the term that seems to have stuck the most, but for private lands conservation practices, at the end of the day, how can you map out a practice, methodically outreach to every landowner, and then install them in an efficient grouping setting? How can we apply this to other practices is a big point. I think we've seen it now successful for residential, urban, and for edge of field and agriculture, and hope to rely on some experts at Heartland Co-op and some local other coordinators to really ramp up cover crops in 2022. So with that, I hope everyone is still awake, but we've had a lot going on. I think I'm pretty pleased with everyone's contribution. There's a lot of local entities doing great work together, a lot of partnerships, a lot of work yet to do, but overall things seem to be going really well. I don't know if anybody has any questions before we hear a little update from North Raccoon.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's have Jonathan Gano, if you're ready to, let's have you go now just for the sake of time, and then we'll come back to questions, and people who want to stick around after are more than welcome.
Sounds great.
Awesome. And Jonathan, if you need anything from my end, just let me know. You got the floor though. Yep.
Okay, good. Well, I feel like a bit of a slacker because I don't have a slideshow prepared. The upside is it'll be short. So there is at least that. For the North Raccoon River Watershed Management Coalition, we had our annual meeting earlier in January, and that was successful, which is saying something for the North Raccoon River Watershed Management Coalition. I think we've largely stanched the flow of if I may use a water metaphor, of northern counties that want to separate off and do their own thing by making a path for them to be able to do that inside the context of a larger WMA. North Raccoon River is a Huck 8 and very large, so not well suited to project level planning at the Huck 8 level. So trying to craft a way forward for the members of the WMA to support the work at the smaller scale. The plan that's been approved by the watershed board is focuses on 6 sub-watersheds inside the typically northern end of the WMA. And we are in the middle stages of getting EPA funding for through the 319 program. We would be the first watershed management plan taken through what's called an alternative checklist. I guess there's a typical 9-element plan. I thought we had a 9-element plan, but EPA won't do a Huck 8 level 9-element plan or some other technical detail. So they're evaluating our plan on an alternative checklist, and as far as we've gotten is authorizing the DNR to answer questions and provide clarifications to the EPA so that they may approve us for 319 funding. It sounds like they very much want to, that the state very much wants to secure 319 funding for the North Raccoon River. I think I tell people it's got the right name to attract attention and money. And as far as resources go, there is no less than 3 USDA RCPP projects working inside the boundaries of the North Raccoon River at the same time. One of them is wholly dedicated to just the North Raccoon River. So there's what, 7.5 million, I think, is the number of federal funding dedicated to just the North Raccoon River footprint through an RCPP project managed by the Iowa Soybean Association. 2 others, the Midwest Agriculture Water Quality Partnership that was first done in 2016 for 9.5 million was approved for another 9 or 9.5 million a year or so ago. We're not the only watershed in that footprint, but we are one of the priority watersheds active in that RCVP. And then the third one is also state the Iowa Department of Agriculture conservation drainage infrastructure. There's more words than that, but it's another RCPP that's in the range of 9 and 9.5 million, somewhere in that range of federal money. So an awful lot of money raining down on watersheds over the next 5 years. So trying to steer as much of that as we can to our northern neighbors, so we may benefit from improved water quality and increased flood resilience. So that's, I think, the current state of affairs there in the North Raccoon River Watershed Management Coalition, which surprisingly some days continues to function and exist. And that's an accomplishment in and of itself.
Yes, thank you so much. I will just open it up and I'll check the chat. It looks like people might have asked some questions, but folks can also unmute. So John, Susan asked, curious about who is promoting the Huck 8 WMA coordinator proposal. Sounds like I hadn't heard about it on behalf of the WMAs of Iowa.
Yeah, a survey was sent to me last week. It looks like the Kara Morgan from the Nishnabotnas, and then Kate Hansen, who I was with the Center for Rural Affairs. They seem to be leading the charge. They sent out a survey last week with that attachment. That was a brochure they're hoping to share. And Kara mentioned that she had been in talks with some local legislators that were interested in being a part of the conversation, or maybe that's where the conversation started.
All right, and then Doug's wondering, is a deep tine aerator being used much? Contractor, homeowner, user, opportunities for more?
I think there has been an increase in use over the last several years. A couple of new contractors, mainly contractors. One contractor, in fact, was using it so much for SQRs that he ended up just buying his own. which again is what we wanted, I think, to get folks, get them at least the resource so they can use it. It's worked very well. We found a couple soils where it's like so poor, it does better than anything else. So it seems to be a great tool there. I think there's definitely, it's still available. It could use more use. I think in general, we actually need more contractors doing the work. There's a rather small group of contractors doing soil quality restoration. So it could be used more, and honestly, we need more contractors.
Awesome.
There
Any
was some concern about maybe it not being centrally located in Ankeny. We've had that discussion that they tend to have to come into town just to get it and take it back down to Des Moines. And with John not being at the district, there was a little concern about just the staff and expertise and getting it out and checking it back in. So we've got some, it's not perfect, but it's working.
Awesome. Any other questions from the crowd? Feel free to unmute yourself or toss something in the chat if you have anything on your mind. Yes, this, I think Rich Leopold said it right. There's a sweet spot on Zoom where there's too many people or too few people, you don't get people talking. So you all have obviously John, Jennifer, Tanner, Laura, and Jonathan's email addresses. If you don't, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions after this and are just being shy. But we'll give you about 1 more minute, and then we'll give you about 15 minutes of your day back if nobody has anything.
Hey, John, I just wanted to say that the presentation for the rain campaign side of things looks really good. If we can get a copy of those slides from the PowerPoint, we can incorporate that with some of our final report materials, and it'll go over really well, especially with the pictures. We tend to find that the only final reports we get comments on from EPA are ones that come with good pictures. So we've been trying to leverage that when we want to draw attention to something. So
Absolutely.
thanks.
Nobody wants to read reports.
And we've got good pictures on a lot of those things. So it's worth 1,000 words, right?
That leads into a good segue. I think one of the things that we've been seeing across the metro when we look at how we're going to interpret and communicate some of these projects back to the public is something that we don't have consistent pictures from jurisdictions or from any staff and things like that. So as you're out there working in the field, feel free to start taking more pictures. If you don't have a link to the WMA investment map that we started last year, I think it was pre-COVID, we actually released it. Feel free to toss stuff up on there. And that's a good reminder as well, as we're sitting inside with the last handful of hopefully cold days. Please do update the investments map. I'll resend a link for everyone. But that is there so we can continue to put presentations like this together, track these things, communicate across the boundaries and things like that. So I'll put if you don't have that link and you are one of the practitioners, please do let me know and we'll get that out to you ASAP. And yes, I will, Clint, share the recording. It's not going to be a link though, I guess. It's going to be downloaded to my file. So. All right. If no one else wants to unmute, you get 13 minutes of your day back. It does look like 6 more weeks of winter, unfortunately, but it's going to be nice this week. So hopefully you get outside and we will see you with this group again in May. Have a good rest of your winter and early spring.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.